Shalom, good evening. This is TV7 Israel News broadcast to you from Jerusalem, and in today's top stories. Israel's security establishment conducts extensive counter-terror activities throughout Judea, Samaria, and the Jordan Valley. Jerusalem acquiesces to Washington's request to delay an international condemnation of the Palestinian Authority's financial support for terror against Jews and Israelis. Iran and Russia condemn Israel for its repeated strikes against Iranian terror infrastructure in Syria. Israeli IDF, ISA, and Border Police Special Operations Forces conducted extensive counter-terror activities throughout the West Bank districts of Judea, Samaria, and the Jordan Valley overnight, during the course of which a total of 16 suspected terror operatives were successfully apprehended. During the course of the activity in the village of Azun, local youth hurled explosive devices toward the Israeli forces, who responded with crowd dispersal means. In the village of Akba Jabir, local militants reportedly hurled explosive devices and opened fire toward the Israeli troops, who responded with live fire. And in the village of Shukba, while the IDF Special Operations Forces withdrew from the scene, Molotov cocktails were hurled in the direction of the armored vehicles. Nevertheless, thankfully, no injuries were cited to the Israeli forces in any of the reported incidents. In other yet related news, Israel has reportedly acceded to an American request to delay an international statement condemning the Palestinian Authority's policy of paying terrorists and their families stipends for killing Israelis and Jews. It is important to explain that these so-called terrorist stipends, payments of which are made monthly by the Western-financed Palestinian Authority, are allocated for each recipient based on the number of victims of their respective attacks. In other words, the more Jews the terrorist murders, the higher the stipend that is paid either to the attacker or, if killed in the process of perpetrating the act of terror, to his or her family. Meanwhile, in honor of U.S. service member Taylor Force, who was murdered in a Tel Aviv terror attack in 2016, the U.S. Congress passed the bipartisan Taylor Force Act, stipulating that the United States would not support the Palestinian Authority as long as the so-called terrorist stipends continue to be paid. The act was passed into law on March 23, 2018, by then-President Donald Trump, which cut roughly a third of U.S. funding to the Palestinian Authority at the time. Meanwhile, acting on the premise of the Taylor Force Act, Israeli Foreign Minister Eli Cohen drafted an international condemnation of the terrorist stipends, a condemnation that was supposed to be issued earlier this week. The statement of condemnation essentially asserts that the Palestinian Authority is the only place in the world that incentivizes the murder of Jews and castigates that policy as unacceptable and criminal, noting that it has no counterpart in the world. And while not necessarily accurate, since there are a number of rogue nations, including, most notably, the Islamic Republic of Iran and Yemen, which both openly call and act upon aspirations to kill both Jews and Israelis alike, the main difference is that the Palestinian Authority's main source of funding emanates from both the European Union and the United States. Meanwhile, while the Israeli Foreign Ministry prepared for the statement, the Biden administration passed on a message to Jerusalem asserting that it was taking action to end the Palestinian Authority's policy of paying salaries to terrorists. In response, Foreign Minister Eli Cohen decided to delay the statement's publication for an unspecified duration. Nevertheless, it was noted in tandem that if the United States administration's efforts fail to bear fruit, Israel will move forward with its initiative. In other news, Jerusalem held its first ministerial committee on the civilian sector's preparedness for emergency situations, during the course of which discussions concentrated mainly on earthquakes.
We held the first meeting of the Ministerial Committee on Civilian Sector Preparedness for Emergency Situations. We concentrated mainly on earthquakes. The State of Israel is located on the Syrian-African rift. We have places that are destined for trouble. We are now relating to two main items. One is to issue warnings and directives to the public on what to do in the event of an earthquake. We will hold a major exercise in November. Second is to carry out preventive action by reinforcing structures in the most dangerous places. We established a Director General's Committee on this matter. This committee will also move forward led by the defense ministers and the participating ministers. I will also personally be involved. The main thing is to prepare the State of Israel for earthquakes and other mishaps. We believe that with proper preparations we will greatly reduce the damage and the price we will pay. We will do it and we will succeed.
Jerusalem's top defense official, for his part, highlighted the dire situation in which tens of thousands of residential buildings were not properly built to contend with earthquakes.
We have some tens of thousands of structures that we need to address so that in emergencies, people will not become trapped in them, heaven forbid, in daytime or at night. The Defense Ministry, together with all the other agencies, knows how to do the work, and we will do what is necessary. I hope that we will make progress. This is good news for the citizens of Israel after many years in which the issue was not dealt with.
It is important to highlight that Israeli geologists have over the past several years repeatedly alerted authorities in Jerusalem that a major and disastrous earthquake in Israel is only a matter of time. Turning to the United Nations headquarters in New York, where the UN Security Council held a meeting on the situation in the Middle East, particularly reviewing foreign military presence in Syria. During the course of the meeting, Russia's ambassador to the world body seized the opportunity to call for the withdrawal of all international forces from Syria. Moreover, Moscow's representative also signaled out Israel for its repeated strikes in Syria, claiming that an immediate stop of Israeli attacks is necessary to bring an end to the conflict.
In this regard, we stand in solidarity with the legitimate demands of the Syrian authorities for the withdrawal of all military contingents illegally located on the territory of the country. We are of the view that achieving sustainable stabilization in the Syrian Arab Republic is possible only by ending the foreign military presence and violation of the sovereign territorial integrity of the Syrian Arab Republic, as well as through the unconditional cessation of regular AR strike by the Israeli Air Force, the most recent of which hit the suburbs of Damascus on the eve of today's meeting. This was the 22nd attack since the beginning of the current year. Such actions in violation of the sovereignty of Syria and neighboring Arab countries, as well as the lack of any kind of proper reaction from UN leadership, are cause for deep regret and continuity on our part.
The Russian ambassador stopped short from noting that Israel's activities in Syria focused chiefly on Iran's efforts to entrench militarily along Israel's northern border, with a clear objective of preparing for an all-out conflagration against a Jewish state. Ironically, Iran's ambassador to the United Nations also addressed Israel's strikes against his country's military infrastructure in Syria, claiming, however, that the struck weapon caches of the RGC and its affiliated proxies were merely innocent civilian infrastructure.
Madam President, we strongly condemn the repeated aggression and violations of Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity by the Israeli regime. These reprehensible acts like the recent terrorist attacks on Damascus and its surrounding areas on August 21st, deliberately targeting civilian infrastructure, constitute a flagrant breach of international humanitarian law and the UN Charter. They also pose a grave threat to regional peace and stability. The international community's inability to address these ongoing violations is deeply disturbing.
U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Linda Thomas-Greenfield, who chaired the meeting, accused Russia of continuing to hold up progress for any political solution to the Syrian conflict. Moreover, Ambassador Thomas-Greenfield also stressed that conditions remained unripe for Syrian refugees to return to their homes in Syria, and while the Assad regime continues to urge for sanctions relief, Washington intends to hold Damascus accountable for its murderous track record until a real political process bears fruit.
The bottom line is this: until conditions improve, the safe and dignified return of the displaced will not be possible. Syrians will not return so long as they risk being drafted into the Syrian army, unjustly detained, tortured, and forcibly disappeared. Colleagues, we saw the August 15th statement of the Arab Ministerial Liaison Committee on Syria, which expressed an aspiration for the resumption of the Constitutional Committee in Oman by the end of the year. It has been more than a year since the Constitutional Committee last met. And we all know who is holding up progress: Russia. The United States will continue to promote accountability for the regime's abuses, including by applying and enforcing sanctions against those who deserve them. U.S. sanctions will remain in place until, at minimum, there is concrete, measurable progress toward a political solution.
Thank you for watching TV7 Israel News. Please tune in tomorrow at this time for the latest edition of TV7 Powers in Play. TV7 Israel News will be back on Monday. Until then, pray for the peace of Jerusalem and salvation of Israel. I'm Jonathan Hassan wishing you a Shabbat Shalom.